Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. US President Joe Biden hosts President-elect Donald Trump at the White House. The two leaders, with a combined age of 159 years, discussed the wars in Gaza and Ukraine and America's economy. Police officials shoot and kill at least 2 protesters in Mozambique's Nampula city, prompting the closure of the main border crossing with South Africa. This as opposition parties continue to protest against Mozambique's contentious October election. Elon Musk's SpaceX begins providing Starlink satellite internet services in Chad upon the military junta's request. Starlink is now available in 17 African nations. Tajikistan says the country has lost over 1,000 glaciers over the last 3 decades. Due to climate change, glaciers remain a vital source of fresh water for the mountainous, landlocked Central Asian nation. And the South American nation of Paraguay bans Argentinian footballer and World Cup winner Lionel Messi's jersey ahead of the World Cup qualifiers between the two sides. Paraguay says fans wearing Messi's jerseys will not be allowed entry into the stadium. Hello and welcome. We begin today with Sudan, where the escalating civil war has once again pushed the United Nations to urge for a peaceful resolution. In the latest, the United Nations has said that continued weapons supplies to Sudan's warring military and paramilitary forces are enabling the slaughter of many civilians, which must stop immediately. The UN Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, said that both the Sudanese Army and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, were escalating their military operations and recruiting new fighters, fueled by considerable external support and a steady flow of arms. DiCarlo also added that this was enabling the slaughter in Sudan, but refrained from naming any country or parties that were sending weapons. Now, Sudan has been grappling with a deadly civil war since the middle of April 2023. A power struggle has erupted between the Sudanese army, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the paramilitary RSF, led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who have been vying for control over territory. According to the United Nations, the conflict has led to over 24,000 lives being lost. Moreover, the fighting has created one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, with over 11 million people being displaced and parts of the country seeing extreme hunger or famine. Speaking about the conflict earlier this week at the Security Council, Sudan's ambassador to the United Nations said that it was the government's top priority to protect the civilians.
In terms of civilian protection, this is a priority for the government of Sudan under the conditions where the state is facing a war of aggression threatening its existence, launched by the terrorist RSF and their allies, the foreign mercenaries, with support, funding and provision of weapons, as well as media and political support from very well-known countries in the region.
The The escalating Sudanese conflict has seen several countries reportedly getting involved and taking sides. Now, reports suggest that weapons linked to countries including Iran, the UAE, Russia, China, France, Serbia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Egypt and Turkey have been found in Sudan. The United Nations experts have also said in a report that the RSF has received support from Arab allied communities, with military supply lines running through neighbouring Chad, Libya and South Sudan. Now, the UN's condemnation comes just days after the UNSC discussed a draft resolution proposed by the United Kingdom and Sierra Leone that demanded Sudan's warring parties to immediately cease hostilities and protect the civilians who are bearing the brunt of the conflict. As it assumed the presidency of the Security Council for the month of November, Britain wanted to put the draft resolution to a vote as quickly as possible.
19 months in to the war, both sides are committing egregious human rights violations, including the widespread rape of women and girls. More than half the Sudanese population are experiencing severe food insecurity. Despite this, the SAF and the RSF remain focused on fighting each other and not the famine and suffering facing their country.
But just to be sure, the United Nations has already passed 3 important resolutions this year on the Sudanese war. The first one was passed on the 8th of March, called for an immediate cessation of hostilities in Sudan during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The second one was passed on the 13th of June and demanded that the RSF halt the siege of the Al Fasher, the capital of North Darfur state. The Security Council passed a third resolution on the 11th of September, renewing sanctions on Sudan, including asset freezes, travel bans, as well as arms embargo. Now, the discussions that the United Kingdom initiated at the UNSC this week also demanded the warring parties to allow humanitarian aid into the country. The United Nations uses the Adre border crossing between Sudan and Chad to deliver humanitarian aid in the form of food and other supplies to the areas that are at risk of famine in Sudan. Sudan had initially agreed to keep the crossing open for 3 months, a period that is set to expire on the 15th of November. Now, reports suggest that Sudan has now extended the use of the Adre border. But interestingly, the crossing is not in the area that is controlled by the Sudan army-backed government. Rather, it is in an area controlled by the RSF. Now, to contextualize, Sudan is split into 2 zones of control, with the army holding the north and the east, and the government based in Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast, while the RSF controls much of the capital of Khartoum, the Darfur region in the west, which also houses the Adre crossing, and parts of Kordofan in the south. The centre is split between both parties. Now, reports suggest that several members of the government had protested the Adre border's opening, as it would have meant that arms supplies would continue to flow into the hands of the RSF through Chad. But the United Nations welcomed this latest decision of the Sudanese authorities to extend the opening for an additional 3 months.
Since the crossing was opened in mid-August, we and our partners have now moved more than 337 trucks of load of humanitarian aid through the route, with more than 11,000 metric tons for food and other relief items that could cover the needs of close to 1.4 million people. Distribution of these items continues in various locations around Darfur. A further 30,000 metric tons of supplies are either already in place in Chad or in transit in the area.
Still, the United Nations emphasized that more would need to be done, as the Adre crossing is alone not sufficient to fulfill the needs of the Sudanese civilians. But as the conflict in Sudan continues to spiral day by day, there is no sight of the warring parties coming to the negotiating table and ending a crisis that has caused havoc in the lives of millions. Now, to discuss more on this, we have with us Mohammed Kir Omer, a political analyst, joining us live from Oslo, Norway. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Now, how significant is the impact of the external weapons supplies in the ongoing conflict in Sudan? And which countries and entities are most heavily involved in providing this support?
The war has been raging for 19 months. A lot of people are using modern warfare through drones, dropping barrels of explosives. And this all needs logistics through neighboring countries, needs military vehicles, fuel, personnel, and gold is being used to fund these purchases. Supporting the army are Egypt, Iran, and Russia, which has, from Wagner Group, it has shifted now in supporting the army. There is also Turkey. Ukraine is also involved in terms of personnel. Supporting the RSF are mainly the UAE, with logistics flowing through Chad and Libya, particularly areas controlled by Khalifa Haftar.
And given the escalating violence and the recruitment efforts by both the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF, what immediate measures can be taken to protect civilians and to ensure the humanitarian aid reaches those in need?
I think the problem is that there is little really the international community and the United Nations can do, because they have to enforce this embargo on weapons. And both belligerents do not care about the people. They still believe they can win militarily. For them, particularly the army who are backed by the Islamists, it is a zero-sum game. They want to finish off their opponents once and for all. And the UN itself has lost credibility. The international order is crumbling. Humanitarian law is at stake. We see Israel kill tens of civilians every day in Gaza and Lebanon without impunity, razes to the ground whole neighborhoods just to kill one person, due to the blanket protection of the US. The UN cannot enforce its decisions, and the Security Council is really deeply divided between China and Russia on one side and the Western countries on the other side using veto power. And the Western countries support for Ukraine, and it shows double standards. With Trump now back at the White House, it is difficult to see how he will react to the Sudan crisis.
And Mohammed, what practical steps can the international community and the United Nations take to enforce an end to the weapons supplies and to hold the violators accountable?
I think there is a need for safe zones. Since the start of the war, I mean, there has been many ceasefires. They were not implemented because there were no people on the ground to see, to see the implementation, and maybe enforce some non-fly zones in some areas. And you need humanitarian corridors, but you need observers on the ground. And you need also the political will of the international community, particularly the UN. But with a divided Security Council, I think there is very little that can be done. Even this resolution is just symbolic, and the UN official cannot even name the countries involved to shame them.
And thank you very much to our guest, Mohammed, there with all the latest on the Sudan conflict. And now let us shift our focus to West Africa, where it looks like new allegations on Nigeria's president have emerged. Reports suggest that the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, has confirmed that Nigeria's president, Bola Tinubu, is regarded as an active asset by the US intelligence agencies. Now, the disclosure surfaced in a joint filing by the CIA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Drug Enforcement Administration. The agencies were opposing the release of the unredacted or the non-hidden information about President Tinubu's background. Now, according to the Nigerian journalist David Hundeyin, who has spearheaded the efforts for full transparency, the American agencies submitted a memorandum citing Tinubu's status as a CIA asset. The CIA's memorandum underscored the importance of safeguarding its intelligence partnerships. It stated that human sources can be expected to furnish information to the CIA, and only when they are confident the CIA will do everything in its power to prevent the public disclosure of their cooperation. Now, this has sparked a huge debate about whether President Tinubu is a CIA agent or not. Now, 72-year-old Bola Tinubu has been serving as the president of Nigeria since 2023. President Tinubu is criticized as the flying president for the frequent visits that he takes outside of his country. He had forfeited about $460,000 to the city of Illinois in the United States in 1993 after an investigation linked him to drug trafficking activities. But in April of 2023, Tinubu's party, the All Progressives Congress, told the Presidential Election Tribunal that he was of no interest to the U.S. government, as the 31-year-old civil forfeiture case was not against him, but against the money that they said was found in 10 bank accounts that were opened in his name. Now, this came as Tinubu's candidacy was challenged by other presidential election contenders. And now the party's claim prompted Nigerian journalist David Hundeyin and the US-based legal data website Plainsight's owner Aaron Greenspan to file a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI, the CIA, and the DEA to seek more information on the US government's interest on Bola Tinubu. Now, the DEA has also supported the CIA's position, asserting that while citizens have the right to transparency about what their government was up to, they are not entitled to unrestricted access about President Tinubu. The report confirmation triggered a mixed set of reactions on social media, with David Hundeyin claiming that the U.S. intelligence support for certain African leaders has contributed to regional instability. Now, some users on social media platform X were quick to comment on how did one jump to the conclusion that Tinubu was an asset, while others criticized the U.S. for installing a criminal as their country's president. And some even went a step further and called this as an act of treason. In response to the accusations on President Tinubu, his special assistant on social media took to X and dismissed the claims surrounding the president's alleged CIA ties. He called them baseless and tragic. But the stance of U.S. intelligence agencies of not releasing information about President Tinubu, as well as the government and president's silence on it, has raised more questions than before. And staying on with West Africa, in Niger, the army has dealt a major blow to the rebels fighting to overthrow the military rule. 9 members of an armed rebel group called the Patriotic Liberation Front, or the FPL, surrendered on Monday as they handed over their weapons and ammunition. They were seeking the release of Niger's ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. As per reports, this surrender comes days after discreet negotiations that involved some influential local personalities. The rebels were fighting for the release of Mohamed Bazoum, Niger's former president, who was overthrown in a military coup last year. Since then, Bazoum has been imprisoned with his wife at their presidential palace in the capital of Niamey. It was after his house arrest in July that the rebel group, the Patriotic Liberation Front, or the FPL, was set up in August of 2023. It has claimed responsibility for attacking the army in the north and disabling part of the crucial pipeline carrying crude oil to Benin in June. The group had also threatened to attack some strategic sites in Niger. Now, apart from the FPL, the junta is also battling other rebel groups, which have kidnapped some of its military officials, Niger's military government has stepped up security in recent weeks. Along with the rebel groups, the army is also battling attacks by Islamist groups who have waged insurgency in West Africa for nearly a decade. Now, in July of last year, the Niger army overthrew the democratically elected president with a promise to better tackle the security problems. The army chief and now self-proclaimed head of state, General Abdurrahmane Tiani, has publicly accused Western nations like former colonial power France of destabilizing the country.
So this sick desire to destabilize Niger spread through the repositioning of all the French DGSE agents that we expelled from our territory. They have been repositioned in Benin City. I repeat, they have been repositioned in Nigeria.
France and the United States were key partners of the Niger government before the coup. They had access to military bases and had deployed thousands of troops to fight against the Islamist insurgents in Niger and neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali. But after a military takeover in all three nations, the Western powers were kicked out and replaced with Russian mercenaries for the counterterrorism efforts. In the latest, Niger's military junta has banned a French aid group from the country. The group, called the Agency for Technical Cooperation and Development, has been active in West African countries since 2010. It was mainly helping people displaced by the Islamist violence and natural disasters. Niger has not mentioned any reason for the ban. However, some pro-junta activists are seeing it as a sign of a march toward national sovereignty, as Niger's military junta promises to undertake what it calls as decolonization in the Sahel country. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the coups and the crises, there are many positive stories from Africa that often get overlooked, but not on this show. Our story today is from Kenya's Wasini coastline, where a community-driven approach is reviving the destroyed seagrass meadows. Seagrass are vital for supporting marine life, and without the seagrass, the fish population in the Wasini had declined. But after a group of gardeners stepped in as a part of Kenyan coastline, is beginning to show signs of prosperity. Our next story gets you all the details.
In the vast expanse of sea, what's common between a fish, coral reef and an octopus? Seagrass, the home of aquatic wilderness. Seagrass nurses the lives of innumerable fish species. They are the Earth's only flowering plant capable of living underwater. Seagrass forms a vital habitat for marine life. Without seagrass, the fish stocks deplete, putting the sea at a risk of becoming a lifeless expanse of brackish liquid. That's what the seawater of this coast was becoming. Kenya's Wasini coastline had its life fished out. Decades of overfishing took a toll on the seagrass beneath the fishing boats. The population of fishes declined, and with that, the livelihoods of local fishermen hit a dead end. But now the coastal community is restoring the precious seagrass. With the community-driven approach, Kenyans off the coast of Wasini Island are taking their sea back to its aquatic wilderness, one seagrass plantlet at a time. Members of the Wasini Beach Management Unit, or the BMU, are working overtime to nurture new life underwater. They plant seagrass through a well-coordinated effort. The BMU members form large underwater carpets made of natural fiber. Then they carefully puncture pockets into the carpet to place seagrass seedlings. The natural fibers decompose over time and seagrass begins its magic. The newly blossomed seagrass beds shelter fish. Marine stocks increase over time, making the aquatic environment healthy and biologically rich.
Before we learn about seagrass restoration, I would only harvest about 2 kilograms of fish, which was not enough to feed my 6 children. But after we learn about seagrass restoration, the harvest is plentiful. For example, yesterday, I harvested 60 kilograms. It is a great benefit. The 2 kilograms I used to harvest could only feed my family. But now people travel all the way from Mombasa to Wasini to buy fish because they have heard in Wasini there is surplus fish.
The seagrass are critical to combat climate change as well. They cover less than 0.2% of the world's oceans, but they store twice as much carbon as forests on land.
Seagrass are beneficial to the ecosystems in the sense that they are habitats that provide food for fish and other fauna that are associated with seagrass ecosystems. They also provide nursery habitats for small fish where they are able to thrive, as well as providing breeding areas for fish and other fauna.
But the revived seagrass beds remain threatened by human activity. A nearby port project involves dredging, the process of removing sediment from the bottom of the sea. The recently restored seagrass faces the risk of being dredged away.
We have invested over 200 million through restoration. I believe the fish port will cause sedimentation at the restoration seagrass meadow because of dredging. The movements of ships will also cause sedimentation. Research using heavy machinery will also affect our restoration efforts. There is also the problem of sound pollution underwater.
The restoration of seagrass has transformed the coastline of Wasini in Kenya. About 2.5 acres of seagrass meadows have been revived, with 10,000 seedlings planted. For the Kenyans in Wasini, the stakes are high. Preserving the seagrass means sustaining the fish stocks. Their efforts have brought benefits to both the environment and the local economy. But the question is, will the seagrass revival survive the stress of modern-day development?
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.